Don't forget he is from MIT University, is the breeding ground for brainwashing and propaganda, including MIT. Do not trust this clown. MIT? Who are we talking about for MIT? I didn't go to MIT. Yeah, wait. I missed the thread in the comments section. You had me at Ramda. Any thoughts on Terrence Howard's ideas and the breakthroughs in bioluminescence? We already talked about bioluminescence. So Terrence Howard is the classic idea, the classic concept of a Dunning-Kruger. When you walk into a field of science, there's a gift to you, and it's a profound gift. All these people who died before you were born spent their entire lives building this beautiful foundation. And they debated it, and they discussed it, and they did these incredible things with it. And there's all this magic in their stories and their challenges and their struggles, but they give that to you for free. It's like being born into a beautiful castle with all these servants. Okay, it's not a new field. Mathematics and physics and biology and chemistry and these other things, they exist long before any of us were born, and long after we're all dead, they'll still be around. Your first task when you enter into those fields is to be humble and be a student. So it's not about adding, it's about taking away. Your cup is full with preconceived notions and biases and other such things, and you empty your cup. And then you have your empty cup. And you have the humility to absorb all that knowledge that came before. And then after you learn that, that's the shoe part of it. The next step is then you start demonstrating that you have a mastery or understanding. So you're climbing up Bloom's taxonomy of knowledge. Okay, so you've gone from I understand it to I can explain it to I can apply it. And then you start moving to higher order thinking. Okay, the next three parts of the pyramid. And as you move that higher order thinking, you're starting to move into analysis mode, and you're starting to move into compare and contrast. And eventually you get to the point where you can start creating new things. So that's the ha, and then the re, shu ha re. You learn, you do, and then you master, and then go on and create new stuff. So what Terrence did is he skipped to the last part of the pyramid, the creation part of the pyramid. The challenge is when you do that, then if you're missing anything in the foundation, things that may seem in your mind like profound insights are either wrong or they aren't connected to any foundational concern. And that's okay, but then you actually have to rebuild the entire pyramid, and you have to rebuild the entire foundation. For example, you can rewrite all of mathematics if you really wanted to. People say, oh, math is set in stone. It's actually not. It's based on axioms. And from those axioms, you derive the system of mathematics. There's no reason you couldn't choose different axioms of mathematics. In fact, people do this. There's a field of math called reverse mathematics. And there's actually a different formulation of the foundations of mathematics called omega set theory. Wooden does this over at Berkeley. Okay, so you can completely reconstruct that. But then you have to do the same things the people who built math did. You have to prove your axioms are independent of each other. It took 2,000 years to show that for Euclid's parallel postulate. You have to show that your axioms of mathematics are non-contradictory. They're consistent with each other. Then you have to show if the system is complete or incomplete. Hilbert did that for his geometry. Gödel, going back to Gödel, there was a question about that earlier. Gödel showed that mathematics is forever incomplete in its current formulation. Then you also have to have decidability. If I give you a statement in your formal system you've constructed, can you decide on the truth value of that statement? It's kind of important when you talk about physics and math together, because you'd like to know if I give you a real life application, you can derive an answer from that. Pretty important, right? So if you're going to rebuild all the foundations, it's really important that you rebuild them in a way where you replicate the use, utility, and capabilities of what came before. And then you make an argument why your new formulation is superior to another formulation. This is what happened in mathematics with topology and analysis. So analysis is a particular way of looking at continuity and a particular way of looking at change. Topology does this as well, but it does it in a very different lens, deformation and variance and so forth. Okay, so you have different tools. They connect to each other. there's ways to build bridges between these two worlds, like the entire Sanger index theorem and these other things. They give you ways to translate one worldview with another worldview. And why we have these different lenses is it turns out that there are problems in topology where the proof is just a few sentences, whereas in an analysis, it's pages and pages and pages of rigorous calculations. And vice versa. There are things in analysis which are very easy to state and solve that in topology are exceedingly difficult to solve. Okay? So if Terrence wants to go and build a new formulation of reality and say that this is useful in physics and in mathematics and other things, first he has to build a bridge to translate that formulation to the incumbent or show why the incumbent is wrong. And he could certainly say, well, there are paradoxes and problems in the incumbent theory that we have. The Banach-Tarski paradox is a great example. There's dozens of these types of things. And you could say, well, my new formulation doesn't have these defects inside of it. So suddenly you now have a superior notion because you're closer to a system without paradoxes. Or perhaps you can have a complete system where everything is deterministic and it all builds up. But there's no discussion of that because to even understand the words coming out of my mouth requires a reverence and respect for the foundations. And you have to understand how they work. And what people do when they have Dunning-Kruger is they play victim. They say the establishment holds me back. They don't accept my unorthodox thoughts. Einstein was a patent clerk and he changed all the physics. What they neglect to say is he had a PhD from ETH Zurich, the Harvard of Switzerland, in physics and understood the foundations. They always neglect that part. Tectonic plate theory. Well, that's true, but the people who were pioneers there were also scientists and had a deep understanding of geology and geophysics. And yes, they had unorthodox ideas that were not in the mainstream, but they had requisite training. So, Norman Wildberger is a great example of somebody who is challenging the orthodoxy of mathematics. He really hates the notion of infinity. He's a very discreet guy, but also he went to Yale and has a PhD in the topic, and he's spent an enormous amount of time thinking about these things and can make cogent arguments about his beliefs, which you may agree with or not agree with or think you lose use and utility from that. That's okay. And that's what the process should do. We should debate and discuss these types of things. And then there's also the broader concept. When you move into the physics world, you abandon what pure mathematicians did. And the physics world basically means that mathematicians don't have to be connected to reality. We don't really care if math actually is useful for anything. That's what pure mathematics is about. In physics, it has to be useful and actually has to be connected to reality. And what happens is if reality disagrees with your model is wrong. And so you have to change your model. So Terrence is giving himself a double dose of pain because he's saying, I'm changing both math and I'm also changing physics. I'm creating this unified thing for these two things. Okay. So you would then have to overcome the entrenched biases, interests, and thoughts of both of those worlds, and you have a double duty. Now, there's plenty of physicists who have done this in the past. Ed Witten is one, probably one of the smartest physicists and mathematicians ever to live, won a Fields Medal as a physicist. And he's a brilliant string theorist. And the reason he got so interested in mathematics is he had to build up all these new mathematical tools just to do the types of physics that he wanted to do. And when you listen to a lecture with him, you can just see that there's so much brilliance in his mind, it's hard for him to verbalize it and get it out. This is the level of rigor that exists there. Terrence didn't do any of these things. And then he goes and claims that he did. And then anybody who disagrees with him is persecuting him and gets into a victim complex and mindset. And if people are laymen and they don't know the difference and they're not trained, it's very easy for them to get swept up in this type of stuff and say, oh, well, we have to embrace this or else it'll prevent diversity in thought or new ideas from coming to light. And unfortunately, that's a bad deal. And we run into this in medicine, by the way. There's a lot of pseudoscience in the naturopathic world. There's a lot of pseudoscience in the non-allopathic side of medicine. And that's bundled in with really interesting stuff in photobiomodulation and PEMF and really interesting stuff in herbs and other such things in Ayurvedic medicine. And they're all just kind of bundled together. And so you tend to throw the baby out with the bathwater and you get too much in your orthodoxy. So at my clinic, we try to do both and we force both sides together and they learn from each other. And if Terrence was really being humble about this, then what he needs to do is sit down with a professional physicist and sit down with a professional mathematician for 6 months to a year, explain himself and keep explaining until they can write down the ideas in a way that meets the standards. And if they're new and interesting, he should be able to do that. At least he did that with his theory of everything while he was on a surfboard. So you can do it. I believe it's called E8, Anyway,